Hi everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion for the Royal Society of Chemistry 2023 Science Survey for Science Teachers and Technicians. I'm Adam Robbins. I'm a chemistry teacher, author, and CPD lead in a Coastal Comprehensive, and I'm here to help you today look through some of the key findings with this year's panel. We're going to look at how these findings of the survey have implications for chemistry education and the wider science education sector. We are going to be broadcasting now live on YouTube and LinkedIn, and later on you'll be able to see this recording on Facebook. We are also monitoring the RSC social media feeds, so please submit any questions you have using the comment bar below for the video. Unless you've already submitted those questions because a Slido is available, then feel free to make sure you will get through those questions. Don't worry, best we can. Excellent. Our panel contains two chemistry teachers, a senior technician, and an education policy expert. And in a moment, we'll get to know some of them and find out their key findings on the Science Teacher Survey. But first, I'd like to introduce a short welcome address from Sarah Robinson, the RSC's Director of Education and Professional Practice. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Adam, and hi everyone. Yes, my name's Sarah Robertson and I'm Director of Education and Professional Practice with the Royal Society of Chemistry. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us today as we gather to share the outcomes of the Science Teaching Survey 2023. It's a pleasure to see so many familiar faces here and also new professionals here today. The inaugural Science Teaching Survey in 2022, supported by the Institute of Physics and the Royal Society of Biology, provided us with an important opportunity to delve into the greatest challenges facing educators, teachers and technicians across the UK and Ireland. The 2023 survey was launched in April of that year and was open for 6 weeks. Almost 3,000 teachers and technicians responded across the UK's devolved nations and the Republic of Ireland. The findings were published on the RSC website at the beginning of January. Teachers and technicians told us about the challenges that they face, including the impact of underfunding and understaffing. Only a minority of teachers have accessed sufficient subject-specific professional development in the last year. Teachers have also recommended curriculum changes to make chemistry more relevant and accessible for all students. As we unpack the findings of the second survey, I've been reflecting on the key themes, how they align with the Royal Society of Chemistry's dedication to impactful work in education, and how they can shape our future endeavours. This year's results in particular shed light on the daily realities faced by teachers in areas of higher socio-economic deprivation. These insights are crucial in informing our efforts to ensure that every child in the country has access to a world-class chemistry education, fostering the talent, the skills, and the inspiration needed to tackle the world's challenges in the future. I'm proud of the RSC's research to further our understanding of many of these pressing issues, from exploring innovative approaches to outreach programs through our Chemistry for All initiative, to supporting external research like Aspires, which examines young people's science and career aspirations. Regarding professional development, I'd encourage all attendees to explore the wealth of resources available on our website, including our free sustained professional development courses, which prioritise places for schools in areas of high socio-economic deprivation. Despite funding challenges, our commitment to advocating for practical chemistry experiences also remains steadfast. If you haven't already, I'd urge you to explore our microscale experiments designed to maximise educational value while minimising resource usage and environmental impact. It's clear that addressing working conditions, including excessive workload, and the challenges of recruitment to and retention in the teaching profession is paramount. Drawing on the insights from last year's survey, we're advocating for long-term solutions to tackle teacher shortages in the sciences, ensuring a more rewarding and sustainable profession for educators. Teach Chemistry, our free service for teachers and technicians in secondary schools and colleges, offers a plethora of resources and opportunities for classroom enrichment and professional development aimed at inspiring students and alleviating workload burdens. I'd just like to take a moment to express my gratitude to each of you for your valuable contributions to this ongoing dialogue. Our collective efforts will enable us to forge ahead with confidence. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you back to Adam, who will introduce the panel members, and together we'll delve into the survey results and explore how we can collectively continue to make a positive impact on science teaching. Thank you very much. And back to you, Adam.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I'd like to introduce the panel first, and then I'll do a little bit to explain how today's session would work. First of all, I want to introduce Amir Ali, teacher of chemistry and head of science at London Nautical School in London. Then I'd like to introduce Vicky Thompson, the senior technician for science at Kilsyth Academy. And then Nikki Kaiser, who is a teacher of chemistry and assistant head teacher at Notre Dame High School and the president of the Education Community Council for the RSC. And finally, Laura Daly, the RSC's program manager for educational policy. Now, how the talk will work is each speaker will get to talk for about 5 minutes on an aspect of the survey. Then we're going to ask one question from the audience before moving on to the next speaker. So while you hear the talks going on, if something pops into your mind, make sure you communicate via the chat box below or via one of our social media platforms. Then at the end, we'll open up for a more generalized discussion and hopefully hear from contrasting opinions about possible solutions. Let's get cracking with our first speaker then. So I'd like to introduce Amir Ali, and he is going to talk about the challenges faced by teachers and how they're amplified in areas of high socioeconomic deprivation.
Thank you very much, Adam. Thank you. Thank you for your introduction. So as Adam said, I'm going to talk about some of the challenges faced by teachers in high socioeconomic areas. And I think once you'll be seeing the slides coming up, you should be seeing one of the issues that comes up first is got challenging student behavior. Now, I've been teaching for a long time and behavior has always been an issue. It seems to be more of a focus at the moment, and it is coming up a lot in surveys and in the Royal Society of Chemistry and the press. One thing I would say is that I think schools are much better at dealing with challenging behaviours in terms of systems. There's a lot of systems in place. There is more support in place. So although it is, and it always will be an issue, I would add that talking to my colleagues and doing my research and going to different schools, teachers are getting more support in that area because we know more now, and their systems have to be put in place. But having said all of that, it's obviously still coming up as a major issue. The other thing I would say, and it's got on the slides, is obviously things about literacy and numeracy. Now, you might well be within a school in our areas where students will need more support with literacy. And one of the things you have to understand is that all teachers have to be involved in teaching literacy and in terms of that disciplinary language. So it's not something you can just say it's the English department or everyone is involved in that. And that does take a lot more planning, certainly in those kind of schools in those areas. Numeracy also, and I think it's really important, that's something I've done in terms of working collaboratively with the maths department in terms of supporting numeracy. Because if your students are strong at numeracy, it's a major advantage in chemistry, but also the other sciences. And the students who do well in maths are also doing well in science. So really work well collaboratively with your maths department. Student attendance has certainly taken a hit after COVID. And I have seen a decrease, a decrease obviously in student attendance. COVID seems to have given further problems, and students I've seen getting them back into school hasn't been easy. And they are, because of the COVID issue where they took that time out, it's difficult for them, some of them, to get back into school. And that is a major hurdle I'm finding over the last couple of years in terms of, getting the attainment and achievement up. Students are more likely and seem to want to take more time off. And I think COVID has a lot to do that. There's no easy answer with that one. The other one I think is also we've got at the end about problem with teaching assistants. Now, I think one of the issues there is it's not just the teaching assistants, it's also recruiting teaching assistants, it's the quality of teaching assistants, but the training in terms of how the teacher works with the teaching assistant. And I have seen in the past, all too often, where the teacher assistant is just left alone. And I think the most important thing is the partnership between the teacher and the teacher assistant. The most important person in that class is still the teacher. And we can't just leave the teaching assistant alone just to support that student. It has to be a partnership. But again, do schools give enough time for that? There's not that time, and certainly not necessarily the funding. Linked to that, I think the most important thing for the science department is not necessarily the teaching assistant, but the technician. So we have a problem with technicians at the moment, where there is a lack of technicians. I've never seen so many adverts out for technicians at the moment, and obviously having a scientific degree within them. I know many schools who haven't got a technician and are struggling to get one. So that's another problem. Just to go quickly onto the graphs on the biology, chemistry, physics, science technicians, there obviously is a huge demand at the moment, and there is a lack of supply. And this is in all areas, especially physics, especially chemistry. And one of the problems that we've got is that a lot of the teachers are teaching out their specialism. And before, a few years back, I had no issue with that. I think it's become more of an issue. And I think younger teachers really have difficulty with that and need more support and more professional development, because when they have to teach outside their area, they're more likely to leave that school. And we need to give them more support. But also, I think it's important that in terms of that, we need more funding. And I think in terms of the recruitment, and certainly the last point I want to make, if you are going to a challenging school, if you are going to a high socioeconomic, it's really important we get the recruitment right. And it's really important we get the right teacher for that school that fits the model, in terms of they are up for a challenge in those schools and those areas. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Amir. That's really fascinating. Thank you. I do have a question for you from the audience. They've asked, what tips do you have for aspiring science department leaders? I wondered if you could speak for a minute on some tips you might have.
Yeah, I think one of the tips is that, get as much professional development as you can, and obviously really focus on what your current head of science is doing, or even other middle leaders within your school is doing, and really see what's successful about that. And whether it's at your school, current head of science, or go visiting other schools, see what they're doing, but use every opportunity, I think, for your own professional development, and obviously to see what you can lead within your department. So are there things that you can lead, whether that's at Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4? So, use the opportunity to get as much leadership skills and leading on different projects within your school and things like that. And also managing other people and leading other people. And that might be ECTs, that might be mentoring PGC students, and that would be really useful in terms of that, managing and leading other people, and also leading projects. And that will help you to support you in terms of dealing with those issues when you do, of course, become a leader yourself.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Fascinating. Now we're going to move on, and we're going to talk to Vicky Thompson, and she's going to talk about the barriers to practical work. Something I think that's really important for all of us here. So over to you, Vicky.
Thanks very much, Adam. So obviously I'm looking at the survey results that came out and paying particular attention to the focus on technicians within that, and where we fit into the barriers to practical work. So there were two slides in particular that highlighted for me the difficulties that we have. The first one, I suppose, doesn't give a full picture in as much as it states that schools with 30% or more pupils eligible for free school meals have a 44% shortage of technicians. I think that actually understates where we're at across the whole of the UK. And when we look at the slide that has the one that's up on screen just now that talks about the barriers to practical work, you can see geographically where that is kind of deep dived into. Within Scotland specifically, we have a variety of issues that are going on in regards to recruitment for technicians. And what I want to do is go through a bit of the journey of why that has become a thing. So, there's a huge issue, obviously, but in the early 2000s in Scotland, there was a paper that was produced called A Teaching Profession for the 21st Century, otherwise known as the Macron Report. It set out clearly what was required as far as support that was required for teachers out with the classroom to allow them to basically have more time for teaching. And within that report, there were examples of formulae attached to the requirement of science technicians with each establishment. So if your school sat at over 1,200 pupils, you were entitled to 3 science technicians. If it sat under that, you were entitled to 2. If it sat under 700, then you would have 1. I don't think nowadays we would perceive that formula as being applied at all in most authorities. And, you know, this is as a result of funding issues that have come to local authorities across the whole of the UK in education from, I would say, from that period onwards. You know, it's a difficult approach to have when you know that as a school you need the support of more staff than you currently have, and that you once had that, to understand that this is something that we now are living in. It's a different dynamic that we have. So within Scotland, we've seen that through those savings, and I would emphasise that I am on social media platforms where I have interactions with technicians from across the rest of the UK, that we have seen a direct impact to what that funding has done to the erosion of the role, the salary, and the capabilities of the technicians coming into the schools to actually function in the way that science departments require of them. If you are being asked, for example, in neighbouring local authorities to do a similar role, but the staffing you are afforded there as far as financially is very, very similar in a different way. So if I go to Aberdeenshire, for example, you have 2 councils that sit side by side. You will have a technician opportunity there to be staffing on £28,000 at the top of their scale in one authority on a 52-week contract. And then the neighbouring authority, they will be offering that same salary on a 42-week term time contract. So if you're living in an area where you could go between either of those 2 authorities, I know which one you're going to choose. You're going to choose the one that's sitting at 28,000 with 42 weeks. So there is no level playing field out there for schools and education establishments to try and attract good technicians to their schools. You know, we have approaches throughout England which, for me, are doing nothing other than eroding away the skill set that the technicians have. They're diluting them. You know, there's an expectation in some schools that they are not technicians, that they are everything to everybody. And that does all of us a disservice. You know, we are skilled within our areas, we are the experts in our field. And if you're not playing to those strengths, but you're propping up what staffing levels are being reduced elsewhere by your technician team, then really the pressure that you put on those members of staff and departments is overpowering. And it's not really going to be a surprise to anybody that people choose to walk away from that. The other aspect that we've had is temporary contracts that have come in. They are a huge barrier. COVID saw an absolute exit plan for a lot of people. People were making choices in their lives that made the decision to change careers, to give up careers, to retire early. You know, we then went into a situation where we were having temporary contracts that gave nobody stability that they needed in a really unstable time. That in and of itself has meant that people are looking elsewhere. Where can I go? When a local authority to mine might have been offering permanent contracts on a similar salary, of course, people are going to go to that because they needed the stability in their jobs. So, you know, there's an element there whereby geographically across the UK, we've got similar things going on. We've got an undervaluing of the profession of technicians, be it both financially, investment in training, investment in time, ability for them to then support what's going to be the need of the department. So when we look at those percentages within the slide, obviously it's incredibly worrying that that's where we're at. You know, we really need to be having something that is fit for the 21st century that we're in, to prepare our pupils for the journey that they need to do, our future chemists, our future scientists. And if we don't have part of our team there, which is the absolute necessity of a technician to support the teachers, then how do we do that? Teachers are, some areas are going back to the 1960s where they did not have a technician in school, where they're having to fit in that preparation alongside the classroom prep, alongside all the other stuff. It's a shameful situation that we're in when we're championing STEM subjects all the time, but we're failing to actually grasp onto the fact that we need all of these people here. When we look at the rest of this, sorry, is that me up?
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Victoria. I do have a question though, quickly, so I'm going to come back to you. The question I've got is, we've talked a lot, or you've talked a lot, sorry, about the kind of institutional pressures that people are under in terms of how the system might be gamed against them. if we could speak directly to the policymakers, the councils, the government, what would be the one thing you'd recommend they do to try and support technicians?
They have to fund them. They have to fund them with a salary that's commensurate with the experience that they bring to the table. You know, they're professionals. They are not people who shouldn't be valued any less than our counterparts. So if they don't fund the actual role, and they don't fund the training, and they don't give aspects there of the ability to somebody to grow into their role, if, you know, we can all come from different backgrounds. So if you can go into a school and grow into that role and be supported, apologies, my lights are going out, be supported within that through a training programme, then you're likely to keep those members of staff. At the moment, we don't have what I would consider that to be uniform across the UK.
Brilliant. So what I'm hearing from you there is it's all about the strategic direction and having some sort of uniformed approach, maybe a kind of national or regional strategy to try and make sure people have accurate pathways to go into these professions, make it more accessible for people, and also provide them with maybe lifelong training to make sure they can grow into the roles that their ambition kind of wants them to follow. We're now going to talk to Nikki Kaiser, and she's going to talk on the idea of that only a minority of teachers report that they have sufficient subject-specific professional development. Over to you, Nikki.
Thanks, Adam. Now that I've unmuted myself, you can hear me too. Hello, everyone. And I found this a really fascinating report, and especially this section on PD, on professional development. Full disclosure, I come to this with quite a few hats on. I'm a chemistry teacher, so I'm someone that teaches and wants to be good at teaching chemistry and a good chemist and someone that knows their subject. I'm also someone that trains other teachers through the research school. So I'm someone that helps to deliver professional development. So it's really interesting looking at this and thinking about why it's important to have professional development, what the barriers are, but also, you know, what we can do about it. So, you know, the why should we care about this? The one thing we know about chemistry is, you know, we always talk about it being this robust, wonderful, you know, really deep subject with broad subject with so many things involved. But it's also constantly developing. It's something that changes and develops all the time. And teachers have to keep up with these changes. And they have to be confident to deliver not just the knowledge and the theoretical side, but there are practical implications as well, and we want those practical skills still to be there. You know, Vicky was talking about how important this is. So this subject-specific chemistry PD, I would argue, is really important, and I would argue that even though a lot of what I do actually sometimes is to develop more general pedagogical CPD, but even then there's a limit to how far this will take you if you don't have that subject-specific focus. So even something that a lot of schools are really kind of thinking about, things like metacognition and how valuable that is to help students. But we know the research behind this says that metacognition is most effective at supporting students if it's in a subject-specific context. The reason that I know Adam, who's hosting today, is because we helped to start an organisation called CogSci-Sci, so looking at the ways of using cognitive science, but within science teaching. It has to have that subject-specific focus. So looking at the first slide, where we had these wheels that if you kind of get underneath them, tell you, and the worrying thing about these wheels is that they tell you the percentage of teachers that didn't access any subject-specific professional development in the last year. So those wonderful big wheels are the people that didn't have access to professional development in a subject-specific context. And What's interesting to me for this actually is, first of all, that Scotland bucks the trend a little bit here. I mean, for all the other countries, we've got 70 to 80% of teachers mostly that aren't accessing this CPD, whereas Scotland, it is lower. I'd be really interested to know where that difference comes from. I'm also really interested to know if, I think when teachers are asked this question, they are thinking about probably external CPD. And I'm interested in how many schools, certainly in our school, we've really begun to use external CPD. It's really important, those providers, but and to that input, but also to really develop our subject development time and to have professional development time within our school and giving priority to that. So looking at slide 2, then that's particularly why I'm interested in this, because when we begin to look at those barriers there, the challenges, the reasons that people aren't accessing the professional development. I don't know if we can put that bar graph up. There's all sorts of reasons that come here. And I don't think any of them are going to come as a massive shock to anyone. It's lack of funding, it's lack of cover teachers, it's the high costs of professional development courses and sometimes teachers having to do this in their own time. None of that is a surprise, but what is quite startling actually is the effect that there seems to be some kind of link between teachers that have less access to professional development, subject-specific professional development, and their well-being. And certainly it appears that those that have less professional development have a lower well-being. Now, is it the PD that leads to a higher well-being, or is it that schools that tend to prioritise things like professional development are generally nicer places to work? I mean, that's again something I'd be really interested to explore. But that does mean, I think, that we have to take it really seriously, especially with all the pressures that we've been talking about in terms of, you know, fewer subjects, so teachers teaching more out of their subject and so on. So I think there's something in here about thinking about how schools can work with this and develop systems themselves. But I think the general message here is that we want and we need more subject-specific professional development.
Brilliant, Nikki. Thanks for that. And we've got a question for you here that it's kind of twofold. One, you've been talking about this idea that schools need to try and provide these opportunities, but you also seem to recognize that schools are in situation of quite financial difficulties sometimes. So how can a school that's got quite a tight budget ensure that teachers get enough subjects of specific CPD? You know, is there any experience from Notre Dame High School that you might be able to share?
Yeah, so I think there is, you know, certainly external professional development is a really powerful and very necessary input to have quite often. But I think also the kind of collegiate approach, we really do talk about that quite a lot in our school. We really prioritise, like I say, not just department meeting times, which are important, but also subject development time. And we do, you know, there is a school-wide approach and a school-wide priority there to thinking, using the expertise that we already have within our schools. You look around you, you will have expertise from people that will be able to help their colleagues. But also that means that if there is external input, then it gives you ways of feeding that outwards within your school. It does come from, you know, a school that prioritises subject-specific focus and professional development in general, and it's a juggling act, because, you know, we obviously don't want to increase people's directed time. You know, we have a certain budget to work within, but you know, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to, yes, still support external CPD, but recognise that collegiate supportive approach within our school itself.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Our fourth speaker today is Laura Daly, and she's going to talk about the outcome from the survey that said teachers recommend curriculum changes to make chemistry more relevant and accessible. Over to you, Laura.
Great. Thanks, Adam. So yeah, there are going to be two aspects to the curriculum data I'm talking about today, and the first is around sort of curriculum content that Adam just mentioned. So the first bit of data is part of the RIC's ongoing efforts to understand the concerns around the amount and type of content in the current chemistry curriculum and to consider what could and should change. So for a bit of context, in last year's science teaching survey, 73% of teachers identified too much content as a key challenge in teaching the science curriculum. And then coupled with that, during the development of our curriculum framework, teachers identified a number of topics that they felt were problem areas or possible things to remove to free up a bit of that time. So in this year's survey, we wanted to probe these topics to get a sense of what teachers felt was the best course of action. So they could suggest to keep a topic, to keep but revise it, or to remove it completely. And as you can see, it's generally quite a mixed picture, as you might expect. Teachers have various opinions about what topics they favour, but the results do seem to indicate that there's an appetite from teachers for some sort of change, or at least a lack of satisfaction in the current curriculum. It does seem that the majority of teachers still view these topics as important, with most still wanting them in the curriculum in some form. However, there seems to be the view among respondents that the content in its current form is either not relevant or useful, or it's too difficult in a lot of cases. I personally find it interesting that the importance of maths is one of the clearer pieces of evidence from this data, especially considering the mixed reaction when quantitative chemistry was introduced during the last big GCSE shake-up. But it's worth saying that there were a number of teachers who commented on the current difficulty and inaccessibility of the quantitative chemistry content for some learners. One other quite clear indication from our respondents was the desire for the curriculum to be more relevant to our young people. And you can see that by the selected quotes on the web pages, with teachers particularly remarking at the lack of relevance of the current curriculum to their students' lives. Just as a quick aside before we move on to the second part, we asked teachers what they thought was the best way to incorporate climate change and sustainability into GCSE science in the transition year in Ireland and National 5s in Scotland. And again, it gave a little bit of a mixed picture with no clear standout preference from teachers of how to approach including more of the sustainability content. So about a third were keen on an interdisciplinary model across the sciences focusing on solving problems. About another third wanted to make the real life applications more explicit. Around 16% wanted just to increase the amount of content, and then 17% said they didn't want any more. But that and the results I just talked about taken in the round have been really valuable barometers of teacher opinion on the current curriculum and stands as an important piece of evidence we have been and will be using when speaking to decision makers about potential changes and also the case for change. And we're also at the RIC currently developing our ideas of what inclusive chemistry education should look like and what it should include. And we'll be articulating this as part of our campaigning in the lead up to the general election. So of course, with curriculum, we need to think more widely beyond just the science content our young people are learning. And science has a huge role to play in the future economy, and young people need to know what these opportunities are and how they get there. And the good news is, on the second slide, is that our data shows teachers are confident in linking the current curriculum to both real life context and scientific careers. They're also confident in advocating for the more traditional academic pathways to a science career, but confidence is really lacking in providing information on technical and vocational routes, with confidence being particularly poor among Welsh teachers and those from the Republic of Ireland really stood out to me. And speaking of Wales in particular, it's going to be interesting to see if this level of confidence changes once the new reformed qualification landscape has had some time to embed. Additional questions in the survey which link to this, and you can explore on our web pages, suggest that the lack of knowledge is the main reason for teachers not advocating more for these vocational pathways, with about 80% of teachers citing this as the main reason. But also alongside that, 30% of respondents cited their school focusing on academic pathways as the reason for not advocating more for these vocational routes. And it's important to note that in England, at least, the vocational landscape is in a period of transition, with BTECs being phased out in favour of alternative academic qualifications, or AAQs, and a more simplified qualification choice for young people. Now, part of this transition obviously has been the introduction of T-levels, which was the government's flagship vocational qualification intended to sit alongside A-levels as a vocational route. But I think some food for thought to leave you with is this survey showed that only 12% of teachers in England are aware of and advocate for this qualification. And I was really surprised at how low that number was. So a question that came to my mind, I suppose, from this data is, how can we empower schools and teachers to be able to suggest and advise on vocational routes into science with the same confidence and enthusiasm as they do for these academic pathways?
That's brilliant. Thank you. Fascinating stuff. And it's interesting to see how there's regional variation with these things, and how the interplay between the curriculum choices various governments have made have kind of had impact in the way that teachers have felt their day-to-day teaching has been impacted. So the question from the audience here is, what more do you think needs to be done to support teachers to provide information on technical and vocational routes into science then?
It's a great question. I guess if there was something that was existing, then teachers would be, would have that information already. It could be just a little bit of CPD and making teachers just aware of what the routes are. It could be more dialogue between schools and FE colleges, for example, just to have that discussion about what's available for students. I think the government potentially as well could, they obviously have T-Levels as their flagship vocational program in England. But obviously, whatever campaign they've had of, advertising it and making it aware that there's this pathway is just not breaking through with teachers. So I think, some more direct communication between people that are bringing these qualifications in and the people that are going to be delivering them and, maybe guiding students down those routes. There needs to be maybe better communication pathways there, possibly.
So it sounds like it's quite a difficult thing to unpick, really, and probably especially in a year that might involve a general election, most likely, one of those things that we may have to monitor over the long term and see where the dust settles on these things. Excellent. Thanks very much for your contribution. We're now going to go into a bit more of a panel discussion. So from here, what will happen is I'll give a question that's been provided to us via a member of the audience or from the Slidos, and then I'll suggest someone to go first on it, and then other people, if they want to join in, they can just join in the discussion, and we'll get a range of opinions and perspectives. So the first question we've got here is, did the survey offer any insight into how the current retention crisis can be mitigated, both long and short term? And I wondered if Laura would be able to start us off on that one.
Yeah, it's a really good question. In the survey, we did ask teachers, if you're planning on leaving in the next couple of years, what would make you stay in your role? And there were kind of 5 main factors that jumped out as things that might make people stay or convince them to stay. The top one was a more balanced or reduced workload, which probably is not that surprising to teachers watching. It was about 25% of people that were considering leaving said that that's what they wanted. Followed really closely by a better work-life balance, which I say those two are probably very closely linked, if not kind of talking about the same sort of thing. Increased pay was next, and then increased funding for classroom and school resources. And then the 5th one was more support with student behaviours. So it's certainly a focus on sort of teaching conditions and, workforce conditions, making things a bit easier and, less stressful perhaps for teachers. Followed by pay. It still comes up as a big factor, but it's not as important as actually getting that work-life balance correct.
Excellent. So you're saying that essentially it boils down to money in one way, shape or form, because we're talking about either more time available for teachers to do things more effectively, maybe, or maybe better pay to compensate them for the huge amount of work they put in. I wondered, Nikki, you've spent some time working across whole school and everything. If you had any insights on what you think might help the retention crisis.
I think money does come into it, because let's be honest, there's 2 things for teaching. I think that, however much it isn't and shouldn't be just a vocation, right? I mean, we should be paid a really, we should be paid for what we do, and it's a really, good profession. So we should be supported. However, I think most teachers would admit that it feels like a vocation. That, what gets us into the classroom every day ultimately is those children that we teach. What helps us, what keeps us going year after year, potentially doing the same thing over and over again. It isn't the same thing over and over again, because it is always a group of children, and they always have different challenges. And so, but because of that, the flip side of that is that it is very difficult to say, okay, I'll stop there and that's enough. And so there's a little bit of, recognition that we will always want to do more. I think teachers in general always want to do more. They always want to help more. But that's not an excuse for not giving them enough time, for not giving them, for not paying them well. But the problem is that even, something as simple as give them more time has huge implications for funding. But it's not just money, because even if we, for example, one of the things I think teachers talk about all the time is just having a couple of hours extra a week of PPA would have a massive effect on their life and their work-life balance. But yes, there's a funding implication there in that we have to pay effectively more teachers there. But we don't have those teachers at the moment. I think I remember reading somewhere that to do that, we would need a huge amount more kind of bodies in the classroom. And that has funding implications. So none of these answers are simple, I have to admit. And then maybe you get into creative solutions that we're not all happy about, with increasing class sizes and all sorts of things. There is no simple solution. But ultimately, teachers want to go to work in a place that they enjoy being in. They want to be in an environment that is safe. They want to go to school and not feel like they're going to be, abused in any way at all, or find challenging behaviour. And they want to have time with their colleagues and have enough time to plan lessons that they want to teach. So, sorry, not giving you any silver bullets or quick answers there, but that's
Come on, you can do better than that. Surely you can solve all the
give us more money. Yeah, no, sorry.
I wonder if we live in this kind of cost-constrained world. I wonder, Amir, if you could talk maybe about things that leaders might be able to do to support their staff.
Yeah, thank you. I think Nikki has covered quite a bit there. So I think one of the things that, as a leader, you could do over time, I think in terms of the resources that you can do, in terms of shared planning, so more shared planning. So, what we don't want to do is the day, although it's still going to happen where they're looking at that, doing PowerPoints the night before, etc. One of the things that we do is have all the resources there for you. And a lot of schools now do this. The schemes of work, the resources, all of that. So they're not spending their time constantly doing lesson planning. They have all the resources there. And yes, they have to make adjustments and things like that. But I think that would really help. I also think to have a very strong mentor and things like that, heads of department, to really be mentoring. I think Nikki's sort of covered it in terms of the professional development and the support. And is there something that we could do, like I mentioned before, I didn't quite say it, with timetabling? And, I'll give you something. Can they have fewer classes? Can we have teachers? And it's not easy because we don't have enough teachers anyway. But science is a special subject because people don't quite understand that when they don't teach science. You've got this specialism issue, physics, chemistry, and biology. So could you have fewer classes, and could they teach more within their own specialism? That definitely over the last few years has come up a lot more. So when I visited a school in America, this was really interesting. They found it bizarre. You had teachers there, and I'm not saying this is the model we advocate, who were only teaching 2-year groups. They found it bizarre how we could be teaching from year 7 to year 13. So, and it's something that came up in the Ofsted report on science. They said, really pay attention to, and it's not easy, I can say it here, but timetabling doesn't work out. Teaching fewer classes, having more support in terms of professional development, and having teaching with their own specialism. But that's something easier said than done, because with the current crisis, we don't have enough teachers. But also coming back to my main point, having those resources in place, so all the schemes of work and all the lessons are in place to support those teachers, so there's less planning. Thank you.
So we're trying to take care of some of the more mundane aspects of workload by providing really clear resources. And some of those resources don't even need to be in-house. There are various places that can help support us, like maybe some of the RSC work on providing resources at different levels might be able to support teachers there as well. Speaking of this idea of contact time, I'm going to ping back to Laura to talk to us about what's going on in Scotland, or being suggested anyway.
Yeah, I'll only add really, really briefly in that during the last Scottish elections, the SNP and Jenny Gilruth did kind of state as part of their manifesto commitments, looking at reducing contact time for Scottish teachers, which I believe is already, quite generally favourable or comparable to English teachers, maybe slightly better conditions. But I know they're definitely looking at reducing contact time, and it'll be interesting to see when they sort of follow their plans through. And speaking to Nikki's point around it's going to cost a huge amount of money, and it requires a lot of extra staff that currently are not there. It'll be interesting to see whether the SNP follow through with that and whether they think it's workable.
Okay, so maybe something that other devolved governments or the main government could look at as maybe a test case over time and see what impact it has. Maybe make a case for the funding or training bursaries and things like that. So we're going to change tack a little bit. We're going to go talk to Vicky for a second about technicians. Vicky, you mentioned in your section how technicians were very rare and very precious. I wondered, you talked a bit about what kind of things could be done to attract more technicians. Well, we've got an international audience right now. There may be people here that are interested in becoming a technician. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what the best things about being a technician are and how we could make it clearer to people why their job is so valuable.
Yes, I think where technicians go wrong is that we are predominantly people who enjoy being in the background. We tend not to be front and centre in a lot of things. So what we have to absolutely do is make people aware of what our role is, what a vital part that we play in the education of young children when we're in schools. And we need to sell ourselves, we need to sell our profession, but we require assistance to do that. So organisations like the RSC really could help to highlight what the role of the science technician is and how they play that part in that whole approach. We should be reaching out to employers, to organisations that have technicians who can come into schools to learn a little bit about what the role is. We're seeing more and more people coming from different backgrounds. There are no one size fits all in our training programme there to produce a school technician. So your background plays a part in equipping you for some of what they ask us, but it doesn't give you all of it. So if we don't highlight what our role is and we don't have governments understanding it, investing in what that means for us as a whole, then we really are missing a trick. As far as what the best thing is about being a science technician, I'll speak personally about what I enjoy about being a science technician, and I get a real kick out of the role that I play within that team approach to seeing the impact that learning can do for those children, exciting them about science, exciting them in the background, allowing my skill set to come forward to assist when it comes to advanced hire projects, upskilling myself and dealing with external people that are coming in, and highlighting that there are aspects to science that are not just about learning from a book, that they are practical, that we get to do some fun stuff. Not all of it's fun, obviously, but some of it is just about knowledge base. But there are fun things that we can do to maybe give a different perspective for pupils that are out there, and that really we are part of that engine. Without technicians there, that whole system just does not work in the way that it could work the best. So, I love the fact that I get to be part of that team, that I get to make that difference, be it in the background for our young people that are coming forward. So hopefully that's something that if someone was sitting not knowing what the job is, that they've got a little bit of a kind of understanding that for me, we're part of a team. We're a big part of that team of science.
Yeah, and it's a bit of the kind of adage of like behind every great science department is a great technician, making sure everything is running and keeping it going like clockwork. And we've had a question from YouTube by a gentleman called Mike Jackson. He says, do you think teachers are aware enough of what's out there? There are lots of organizations offering various support for professional development. I can understand the cost barriers to some, but I'm surprised so many people in the survey mentioned availability as a barrier. And I wondered, Nikki, as the person that was interested in this, you could maybe comment first on what you think might be some of the barriers.
Yeah, it interested me as well, because I feel like sometimes teachers, schools, leaders, middle leaders feel almost swamped by the amount of support that is offered to them. And if we're not careful, you can kind of get lost in this swamp of support, and also, you know, barrage of kind of leaflets and emails that come in offering support. So I wonder if it's less that they don't know what is available, but are less certain where to go to look for, or who to trust, you know, is a really big thing, which is what, this is why I think we're really spoiled within as chemistry teachers, because, you know, genuinely the RSC resources, the resources on education in chemistry, were really my introduction to the RSC as a teacher. There is so much there. There's so much support there, and there are, you know, particular professional development things that they offer as well. Obviously, I work for a research school which is overseen by the Education Endowment Foundation, and a lot of what they talk about is that being that trusted source of support and evidence-based and research-based and so on. But I think, you know, there is also now much more that's grown from teachers looking for support from each other, this kind of grassroots approach that can be misused, that term, but you know, there's the kind of group that we're in with CogSci where teachers are sharing you know, really good ideas and linking to resources and so on, and giving each other help. It is that collegiate approach again. I think what I worry about is that if we're not careful, teachers are feeling that they have to search for this themselves outside of school in their own time. And what I want to see more of is teachers being supported to do this within their working day, within their time, sharing with others, using these trusted resources or providers or whoever they are. So for me, it's less about who those people are. You know, I think there's lots of people out there, and I go back to, again, those systems and those approaches that can happen within school. You know, what Amir was talking about was good support for teachers to help them day to day that comes within school. This can be the same for professional development. But yeah, that did surprise me a little bit as well when I read that statistic.
So Amir, let's pick up on that a little bit. Nikki's talking about providing resources. You've mentioned about collating resources and having them centralized. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about if that is just teaching resources, or if we're talking also about kind of the training on how to teach, like the pedagogical content knowledge of teaching chemistry. Now, how does a leader help provide that to their new teachers? Yeah,
I mean, that's something where I think external organizations are important. So I think, you know, so for example, I'll just give you something. I've got non-specialists in my department because we couldn't find a science teacher. And I think a lot of schools are in the same position. So I've used STEM learning, for example, that have been really useful to train teachers. I think going back to, and this ironically is, and who they find actually is the most important person, is going back to what Vicky said, is the technician. I can't tell you how important the technician is, because the technician leads the training, especially for some of the ECTs and for the non-specialist that we have. Also, I think what's been useful, and it can be useful, there's a lot of multi-academy trusts now. And for example, you can use them as support. So for example, if you've got a hub of schools together, you can use teachers and leaders from different schools to help your professional development training. And I think that's been quite useful too, in terms of the support and professional development. And I think also what I've encouraged people to do, not only visit other schools within the trust, but visit other schools and things like that. I think that's really useful professional development that I found in terms of that.
Yeah, so you're talking about, we're talking about outreaching and creating a kind of broader network, and maybe heads of department sometimes, or science leaders, one of their roles is to try and curate that information and kind of funnel it down. I totally agree with what you're saying with regards to the roles of the technicians. Vicky, have you had much time training new teachers when they've come into your school?
So within my school, what usually happens is when we get student teachers and probationer teachers, they're pretty well supported by external organisations for a portion of their training, but they will come with some gaps in their knowledge because obviously they've not delivered the curriculum before. So my role as a technician is usually just to support them in the equipment and what they need to learn about how to use that. And I take time out with student teachers and probationer teachers to ensure that they're supported in that way if I can, if I've got enough time to do so, but it's not prescriptive, and it wouldn't be the expectation that I was the trainer for the teacher within my establishment, but there's certainly multiple levels of support that I give to all teachers, and especially entry level, because you want them to obviously be doing experimental work. It's not in my interest for them not to be doing experimental work, so I want to make sure that they're as supported as they can for that to be the case.
Market forces in action, as always, hey?
Yeah,
but I do
absolutely.
agree, you know, the amount of capacity technicians have to provide confidence more than anything else for teachers to be able to work safely with the students and provide them with these opportunities to learn through effective practical work is absolutely vital. Now, unfortunately, that final comment brings us to the end of available time. I just want to take a moment to extend my thanks to the panelists for giving up their time and expertise, to the audience for the questions that were asked and the valuable questions that helped shape the discussion at the end, and also to the backstage team who've done a fantastic job making this event run so smoothly. If you want to dig deeper into any of these findings, then you can read about the survey that has just happened, and you can register for next year's survey by going straight to the RSC website. Okay, that's rsc.org, and we'll therefore be able to take your contributions for shaping the future of chemistry and science education for years to come, hopefully. Take care, everyone. Have a good night, and thanks for watching.